Just a toothbrush. We used to look over the river Prut to Romania and say, those poor people, no food, no electricity, no lights anywhere. Now it's the other way round. When we look over the river, there are lights everywhere, and it's us who have no electricity and no fuel. Mikhail, a young Moldovan pastor, was telling Pops how things had turned around. The dictator Ceausescu had been overthrown, and Romania was now free from the clutches of Russia, no longer having to export the majority of their food to the east. However, because communism in the USSR was now breaking up, and as Moldova had no power of its own, they relied on the Ukraine for their electricity. But Moldova had no money to pay Ukraine, and Ukraine had stopped supplying electricity to them. Mikhail and Pops were still talking as the young pastor showed Pops into his vegetable garden. No flowers, because you can't eat flowers. The garden was impressive. There wasn't a foot wasted. Everywhere there were plants growing that would feed the pastor's family, and as Pops was getting to know this wonderful young man, he suspected it would be half the village too. As Pops and Mikhail turned the corner of the house, Pops was confronted with a scene he'd never thought he would see in Europe. There was the pastor's wife and his mother, knee-deep in a hole filled with mud. They were cutting wheat stalks up with knives, throwing them into the mud and tramping them down with their feet. They were making bricks to repair their house after fierce storms had washed down most of the outside walls, which were also made with mud and straw bricks. There was no B&Q in Moldova. This was real do-it-yourself. But the whole family was praising and thanking God for the provision of mud and straw. That's when Pops fell in love with Moldova. Mikhail and his wife lived in the south of the country. In the north, Pops discovered another remarkable family, Peter, his wife Ria, and their children. Peter owned a Kamaz, probably one of the best trucks ever built in Russia. Although North Moldova was very fertile and had a good climate for growing all kinds of vegetables, because of the lack of money, Peter's village, which we would call a small town, couldn't sell their produce. So Peter decided to load up his truck with the produce and drive north into the Arctic Circle, as you do, to sell the villagers' produce to the workers on the oil drills and pipelines. With temperatures somewhere below minus 35 degrees, these trips were very dangerous, but if the villagers were to survive, this was the only way they could get a decent price for all their hard work. On one of the visits to Peter's village, it was arranged for the team to visit and preach in a number of prisons. The last prison the team visited was about a 2-hour journey from Peter's home. All the team were up early, keen to be the first to use the outside toilet, the facilities, as Joe called them. It consisted of a tin bowl. When it was full, the contents were thrown onto the soil where the vegetables would be planted. Ria grew wonderful-looking vegetables. When it was Pops's turn for the facilities, he had to pass through the yard where he discovered Peter had taken the whole engine and gearbox out of his beloved larder and spread it over most of the front yard. "Don't worry, we'll all be done before breakfast," smiled Peter. Starling machines always need repairing. Time to leave for the prison, and sure enough, the Starling machine was ticking over just beautifully. On the road, Pops wondered why Peter kept his arm out of the car window. "This accelerator," explained Peter. Around his hand he had tied a piece of string which then disappeared under the bonnet. The other end was tied to the carburettor, which explained why there was a hole where the accelerator pedal should be. "Automatique," Peter proudly explained. At the prison, the team sang some songs and explained how they'd been saved, and Pops preached. When possible, Pops liked to take clothes, shoes and toiletries into the prisons to give to the prisoners. But as this was the last place to be visited, there was hardly anything left. By the time the prisoner appeared, all that Pops had left was one toothbrush. He didn't know what to do. Would it be an insult just to give a toothbrush? The prisoner was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She held out her hands, and as Pops gave her the toothbrush, tears filled her eyes. She took it as if it was a diamond ring, held it close to her and kissed Pops's hand. Pops looked at the prison captain, who said, "She's been asking for a toothbrush for months, but we have none to give her." Pops had nothing to give this young woman but a toothbrush, and a toothbrush was all she wanted. Our government has just spent close to 300 billion helping us tackle the pandemic. That's a lot of toothbrushes. At the judgment, Jesus will call the nations to stand before his throne and judge us on how we have looked out for one another.